You know what? I'll go ahead and throw that in there. Again, if you're doing a specific build, you could look at your motherboard's QVL list for qualified vendor list for memory that's been verified to work. But again, we're just getting a ballpark figure on prices here. You don't have to follow these exact parts necessarily. We're going to need storage. I do think that a high-end PC should be using an SSD. SSD prices are pretty low right now, so you can get 2 terabytes for not a lot of money. So I think a high-end PC having a 2 terabyte SSD is going to make sense. Let's get PCIe Gen 4. But again, I'm going to kind of sort prices low to high here, and I'm not going to bother comparing each of these to figure out which one is the absolute best or anything like that. We're just going to slot in a fast 2 terabyte Gen 4 drive. I'm going to go, I've actually used the Team Group Cardia Zero here, so I'm going to slot this one in. There's some you could spend a bit more on for more speed, some you could spend a bit less on, but again, $100-ish on your SSD for a high-end system sounds reasonable. Let's go ahead and, again, we're going to skip the video card until we've got the rest of the system set up. Case-wise, you could spend as little as like $30 or $40 on a case. I think that, you know, to get decent airflow, a couple of fans, and something that you know, is decent quality, spending around $100 is fine. I have a Corsair 4000D airflow that I like a lot, and I know it can fit an RTX 4090 with no issues. So I'm going to go ahead and slot that one in here, but again, it's kind of a placeholder. You could spend $100 on a case, you could also spend $300 or $400 on a case, but that's gonna be mostly about making it look fancy for a build, not about performance. Power supply, you definitely want to get something good quality, and because we will be starting out with an RTX 4090, I want at least 850 watts. Spending a little over $100 on an 850 watt power supply seems perfectly reasonable. I think the Corsair RM850E is a reasonable choice, and again, I'm not saying these has to be these exact parts. I know I keep stressing this, but we're just kind of saying, you know, a little over $100 on a high-end power supply seems perfectly good. This is a perfectly reasonable high-end platform with everything except for the video card, and this is coming in at about $950. So at this point, we could now throw in the highest GPU we possibly can, which would be a 4090. Nothing else competes with it in gaming. And it looks like sorting prices low to high right now. Wow, that's kind of unfortunate. These have been down around $1,500 to $1,600 for a while now. It looks like prices have gone up. I'm gonna go now, and again, you could get different coolers if you like the way it looks better. You know, maybe you get slightly more overclocking headroom. I'm gonna go ahead and slot in the cheapest one here. Maybe you like a certain manufacturer's warranties, whatever. This gets us a ballpark figure of $2,745. So let's go ahead and hang on to that number. So let me put it this way. How much should you spend on a gaming PC? If you want the absolute top of the line gaming performance from both the CPU and the GPU, it looks like you can get that for less than $3,000. Now, could you upgrade things from here? Yes, I think especially you might want to get spend a little more time looking at motherboards and maybe get a higher end motherboard here, something like that. But you know, you could go with a fancier CPU cooler, even if it's a little bit unnecessary. And if you're wondering, can the 4090 really run on an 850 watt power supply? Absolutely, especially with a 7800X 3D as opposed to like overclocking a 14900K or something like that. This should be absolutely fine. Now, could you go with a 1000 watt power supply? Definitely, you totally could. Anyway, but I'm saying under $3,000, and we're at about $2,750. Anything past this, I think you're spending on looks and brand choices, things like that, preferences rather than raw performance stock out of the box. Okay, so now let's look at how does performance scale from here? So how about graphics? The biggest thing here is graphics card, right? So if we don't buy a 4090, I think a 4090 makes huge amount of sense if you're gaming at 4K and it's in your budget. I think it even makes sense if you want high refresh rate 1440p without turning down graphic settings. You want to use ray tracing and things like that. But a 4080 can still do an excellent job at 4K, especially if you're willing to use DLSS, you know, at the quality setting or something like that. And at 1440p, even better. And if we sort prices low to high, the cheapest ones right now looks like 1060. Another option here would be something like the 7900 XTX, which is about $100 less. There's a few that have been, kind of posted at wrong price. That's an RTX 2060. That's weird. Okay, anyway, $950. So you could go $100 less if you want to go the AMD route. Personally, at this price range, I would probably want all the bells and whistles and DLSS upscaling and best ray tracing performance. So I think the $100 difference there in terms of the grand scheme of the build, I think this makes sense. But again, we're not getting a specific build necessarily. We're saying how much should you spend? By making that change, we are now down at about $2,000 even. And this is still a fantastic build for 4K or for 1440p. But now let's look at how are we scaling in price to performance? In other words, we're going to bust out a calculator. So we now have a $2,000 build, but we started out with $2,750, which means by making the change to the 4080 instead of the 4090, we are now at 73% of the price, leaving everything else the same, still having a super fast gaming CPU, all of that. And if I go ahead and pull this chart up, this is Tech PowerUp's relative performance database, and I'm going to put this in the video description. Now, the reason why I'm pulling this up, first of all, I should mention, this is mostly, I think, focused on rasterized performance, not ray tracing performance, which is why the 7900 XTX and the 4080 are basically tied. And also, different games scale differently. And, I don't think this is necessarily perfect, but it's usually within 5% or so of what I think is pretty accurate. And it lets us compare a bunch of GPUs, and we can set any of them as a baseline. So if I set the RTX 4090 as the baseline, the RTX 4080 is reaching 78% of the performance. So assuming we are GPU limited, not CPU limited, which is likely if we're in the heaviest games, at high resolutions, we're now getting about 78% of the performance for about 73% of the price. So it is a little bit more cost effective to go with the 4080 versus the 4090, but it's not egregiously so when you're factoring in the entire price of the build rather than just the graphics cards. If you compare just the graphics cards, it's $1,050 versus about, what was it, $1,800 right now. You're getting, it's 58% of the price for about, 78% of the performance. So comparing just the GPUs, the 4080 at current pricing, 4090 pricing went up. That's kind of exaggerating this, but the 4080 is actually offering better value. But as a price of the entire PC build, if you're not just upgrading your graphics card, but the entire PC, it does look like the 4080 is, a little bit better value overall in the terms of the full build, but the 4090 actually, didn't scale that badly as you spent the more money. So is it worth it to buy the 4090? If it's in your budget, it wasn't that much worse, but this build with the 4080 in it is a little bit more cost effective. And again, you could slot in a 7900 XTX if you prefer AMD, don't care that much about ray tracing and want to save $100 more. Now, our next step we could make down here, I think would still be, you could shave off the CPU a bit here. If you were expecting to be GPU limited rather than CPU limited, you could drop down on the CPU here before cutting GPU. I'm gonna go ahead and cut GPU one more tier before we do that though. The next tier down would be something like a 4070 Ti or a 7900 XT. They're both coming in a little bit under $800. You could slot in either one depending on which you prefer. The 7900 XT has, more VRAM at 20 gigabytes, a little bit more raw performance when not using ray tracing. You know what? For the sake of mixing it up a little bit, let's slot in the AMD GPU this time, but again, could consider the 4070 Ti. I have other videos talking about that choice. So this brings our build down to $1,726. So $1,726 is our current pricing right now. So $1,726, and compared to our high-end build with the 4090, we're at about 63% of the price. If we're still on GPU limited performance, we're at about 62 to 68%, depending on which of these you want to go with. And if you're going the AMD route, you get less ray tracing performance features, whatever. Anyway, but we're in this kind of ballpark versus the 4090. So it looks like, price to performance scaling on the total build. Again, it actually seems to be scaling fairly linearly off of the 4090 build, which seems to be suggesting that you really kind of just get what you pay for on the GPUs, and it's not showing a significant diminishing returns one way or the other on these high-end GPUs. Now at this point, we could cut down the GPU again, or we could cut down the CPU, or we could do both. So I think what I'm gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna look at, okay, what if you don't need the absolute top of the line CPU? Because as you cut down the GPU, you know, you're less likely to run into CPU limitations if you slot it in, let's go with like the Ryzen 5 7600. This still gets you the AM5 motherboard platform, which will have some upgradability in it. We are losing some performance though here. This is 7600X, which is similar to the 7600 performance-wise. You know, we're definitely losing some performance here, but this is CPU limited performance. If you're limited by the GPU, which is again, as we lower the GPU, a little bit more likely to happen, you know, we could slot something like this in, and now we're down to about $1,560. So if we look at 1,560, so 1,560 versus our top of the line build with the 4090 and the top end CPU, we're now down at about 57% of the price. And again, as long as we're GPU limited performance, we're getting better than 57% of the performance of the 4090 build. But again, you are losing some performance in CPU limited scenarios, or, you know, the ability to support a future GPU upgrade without having to upgrade the CPU and running into CPU limits. So again, that is something to consider. From this point, if you wanted to cut the budget further, I think it does make sense to cut the video card back again a little bit here. And the next step down would be a 4070 or a 7800 XT. The 4070 is coming in at, if I sort prices low to high, the cheapest models are $520, down from an original MSRP of $600, and most models are closer to $550. The AMD alternative in this price range is the 7800 XT, which is $500. Usually performs a little bit better. We're talking 5 or 6% than the 4070 if you're not using ray tracing. But the 4070 does have better ray tracing performance. It's still strong enough that you might want to use it. And if you're going down to this GPU tier, I don't think you should be thinking about 4K gaming. I think these would be better suited for 1440p or really high refresh rate 1080p. And at 1440p, I think the 4070 ray tracing performance worth considering. Also, DLSS upscaling looks better than FSR2, so you might be more likely to use upscaling and feel happy about that and get some performance that way. Again, you could slot in either one. Personally, with pricing this close and performance this close, I'm sold on the extra $20 for the extra features on the 4070, but whatever. You could go either way. That's not really the point of the video. So now we're down to a $1,300 build. A $1,300 build that I think would be excellent for 1440p. You get a whole bunch of good features, really good performance, a lot of upgradability on the CPU platform, and we're now at $1,300, pretty much even. Again, feel free to slot in the 7800 XT, and we're at 47% of the price of our absolutely maxed out, you know, 4090 and 7800X 3D build. Again, assuming our performance is GPU limited, which again, if you're using graphically demanding games at 1440p on an RTX 4070, that's actually pretty likely. And you're now at about 50% of the 4090's performance. That's kind of what we're seeing on this chart. And again, that'll be relevant if you are GPU limited. Basically, we're getting, you know, about 50% of the performance at 47% of the price. That's still scaling, you know, fairly linearly. I think this is a lot of this is due to the fact that that 4090 build, you know, the prices on the 4090 have gone up. And again, we're also cutting the CPU here as well. So I'm really not seeing horribly diminishing returns in one direction or the other, which is pretty interesting. This is technically a little bit better performance per dollar than what we were seeing on our 4090 build. And I'll tell you right now, if I was personally building a PC for 1440p gaming and I had I could go up to this price point, I think this build looks really good. You could also maybe get by with the stock cooler on this. And you know what? If we're going to cut down prices further, let's take a look at that. So you could live with the stock cooler on the 7600 and upgrade it later if you find it too noisy. We could also get by with a 1 terabyte SSD. So maybe let's do that. So let's cut a few things that aren't directly so much performance related here. Because I'm going to say on the CPU and GPU here, I would really hate to go lower. So again, I could maybe live with a 1 terabyte SSD instead of a 2 terabyte SSD, and we just won't be able to have as many games installed. I'd still probably go for a PCIe 4.0 drive, sort prices low to high. Again, I don't know the exact stats on all of these off the top of my head. Here's basically, I think pretty much the same one we had before, but in the 1 terabyte variety. Could go down to $43 in some of these cheaper ones. I'm not sure the exact stats on them. I'm going to go ahead and just slot in something like this. So this is bringing our budget down a little bit more without directly getting into the performance. Also, GPUs in this tier, I don't think we need the 850 watt power supply anymore. So we could go ahead and cut this power supply. Now you do want to be careful cutting power supplies because you don't want to end up with absolute junk. Now I've referenced this before, but I'm actually going to show it this time on this video. This is the Cultists Network power supply tier list, which is generally recommended a lot for getting a rough idea of how good the power supplies are that you're looking at when you're getting a bunch of them. Tier A's would be great. Some of this is kind of speculative based on stats without full reviews. Tier B is also probably going to be absolutely fine. And honestly, even Tier C, you can probably live with, and I wouldn't expect to have major issues or anything like that. However, they go down to avoid lists and, Tier D's, things that probably specifically have issues with them. Tier F, replace immediately. Things like that. So you can use this, and I'm not saying this is, I don't have enough knowledge on power supplies to tell you how perfectly accurate this tier list is, but it does at least give you something to work with other than just looking up specific reviews of specific models. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say that on a 4070, I would be absolutely fine with a 650 watt power supply of a reasonable but not necessarily excellent quality. Keep in mind, by doing this though, you're limiting your upgradability on what GPUs you could slot in from an upgrade, but it should be absolutely fine. I'm also sorting for 80 plus bronze, gold, platinum, and titanium, which are efficiency ratings, not quality ratings. I'm going to sort prices low to high here, and I'm going to go ahead and take a glance here. Okay, the Apevia Premier is 80 plus gold, semi-modular for only $60, and I'm going to go ahead and look at the tier list. I think I saw this in the C tier. Let me go ahead and pull this up. Apevia Prestige is a speculative tier C unit. So not great, but it's not one of the avoid immediately listings. So you know what, guys? Again, this is not a specific guide that you have to follow letter for letter, but I'm saying we could cut our power supply budget if we absolutely had to. And this one is apparently not terrible, at least according to that. So let's just slot this in as at least a placeholder on a lower tier power supply. We can also get by with a cheaper case. I'm just going to sort prices low to high. Fantex is a decent brand. This should be able to fit. It only has one fan in the back, but if we're on lower power components with a mesh front, this will probably get the job done. It is a mid-tower case that should fit our parts. I'm going to go ahead and slot this in because it's only $35. Obviously, you could spend more. But what I just showed you guys is we've pulled back from a $1,300 build to basically an $1,100 build. And while we've lost some niceness on the case, some upgradability for our power supply and the quality of the power supply, I don't think we've cut, and we've lost the CPU cooler and some storage space. Performance-wise, we're going to basically be the same. And now, we're at basically $1,100. We're at 40% of the price of our 4090 build, but again, that had top-tier stuff and everything. But again, we're still on an RTX 4070, so for just GPU-limited performance, we're still getting about 50% of the performance, but now for 40% of the price. So you can see that you can peel some things back, and you can get more bang for the buck on the overall components here. Now, at this point, if you want to, I really want to say that, like, I think this is kind of the sweet spot for a 1440p value build. and cutting past this point is going to be painful. If you're going to cut past this point, now we need to start cutting a CPU or the GPU more significantly. If you're more into esports gaming, where you're more likely to be CPU limited, probably cut the GPU first. If you're more interested in more graphically demanding single player stuff, or even multiplayer stuff, but you keep the graphic settings turned up, you're more likely to be GPU limited. And I would say be less likely to cut the video card. Anyway, with that in mind, let's go ahead and cut some stuff. Video card wise, our next step down would probably pull us into the $400-ish range. We could look at something like the 6800 non-XT. I've seen these as low as 380 recently. Looks like they're back up to 400. The NVIDIA alternative would be something like a 4060 Ti. 4060 Ti 8GB version is down to 370 right now, so $30 less. Also performs lower and only has 8GB of VRAM. 8GB of VRAM is not a disaster, but it does mean that in many modern games, and probably more as time moves on, you will have to be mindful of the graphic settings you're using to not spill over the VRAM capacity and cause issues. So personally, between these two, I would probably take the 6800, but again, this isn't really a video about exactly which one you should get. I'm just slotting in the next GPU down. The 6800 has 16GB of VRAM, which is really nice to have, and it does also have more raw performance when you're not ray tracing. And we're getting down into performance tier where, especially if you're trying to play at 1440p, I'm not sure ray tracing is going to be meaningful. Having DLSS, though, from the 4060 Ti, I think is the main selling point you might go with there. Either way, we've cut our budget down to about $1,000. If I had to build a PC for about $1,000, this would be one option. The other option would have been to cut the CPU and to keep the 4070, which honestly might have been my preference. We're probably going to do both here, though. But if we do want to take a look at where we're at, price to performance now, right now, we're now down to 36% of the price of our, ultimate, 4090 build. Well, ultimate without, but still being frugal on the parts. 6800 reaching about 45% of the 4090's performance. But again, losing some features from NVIDIA as well as, ray tracing performance and all of that. But anyway, 45% at least on a raw power note at about 36% of the price. So we are definitely getting more bang for the buck on this build. If I was going to cut from here, if I'm going to cut the GPU further, I would probably actually just choose to cut CPU first. So at this point, if I'm going to cut CPU, here's the big downside. We have to leave the AM5 platform. And if we're going to leave the AM5 platform, that means we're sacrificing future upgradability. At this point, you'd go either AM4, you could go to something like a 5600, which is a 6-core CPU that's still pretty solid for about $150. Or you could go the Intel route and go with a 12400, which is a 6-core CPU. Again, it has similar performance to the 5600. One thing I like about this platform is you could upgrade to like a 14th gen CPU in the future, maybe buy it used once there's used options available, something like that. Although if you go with the 5600 route from AMD, you have upgradability to something like a 5800X 3D, which is also a good deal. Since we did AMD for our high-end platform, how about we switch to Intel? But again, these are kind of placeholders and they occupy a similar budget, and we're mostly looking at budget at this point. This CPU should come with a stock cooler, so would the 5600 non-X version. So we're gonna be budget conscious and go with the stock cooler. And again, we'll need a compatible motherboard. I'm gonna sort prices low to high. H610 is kind of like that kind of low-end chipset, has some severe limits on the amount of RAM slots, and I think some memory speed support and things like that. I don't remember all the exact details. I'm not going to research all the motherboards right now. I am going to notice that we do get a B760M, which would be a newer platform with only 2 memory slots, though. It looks like we get 4 memory slots on this ASRock B660M. I'm going to go ahead and go with that. This is a $90 motherboard, and we will need some memory to go with it. I believe this is probably a DDR4 board. Yeah, it looks like that. PC Part Picker should sort that for us. On compatibility, I'm just going to go ahead and sort prices low to high, but I still think I would go with 32 gigabytes. And on DDR4, it's even more important to make sure you get 2 sticks, not just 1, to be in dual channel mode. So let's go with 2 16GB chips. And DDR4 3200 CL16 isn't incredibly slow or anything like that. You could certainly buy faster, but again, we're on a tight budget at this point, so I'll slot that in for $50. By cutting the CPU, motherboard, and memory cost, and going with the stock cooler, we're now down to $834. We still have the RX 6800, and so, okay, here we go, $834. We're now down to 30% of the performance, 30% of the price of our, tricked out 4090 build. But we still have the RX 6800. So when we're not CPU limited, which honestly, the 6800 at 1440p, it's going to be pretty taxed. And the 12400, don't get me wrong, this is still a pretty potent gaming CPU. We're still going to be around 45% of the actual gaming performance, with a whole bunch of other sacrifices to upgrade ability and CPU limited performance and whatnot. So this is definitely more bang for the buck. And I've got to say right here, here's another thing I really like. This is still noticeably more powerful than a PlayStation 5. The 12400F is a faster gaming processor than the processors in the Series X and the PS5. And the RX 6800 is actually significantly more powerful than the GPU in a PlayStation 5. And it also has as much VRAM as the PlayStation 5 has unified memory, so you should be able to run at all the same settings that the PlayStation 5 does, but do it at either higher resolutions or higher graphic settings, or less aggressive upscaling settings. So that's cool, but we're still spending more than a PlayStation 5. Now at this point, I'd probably, if I had to cut the GPU, and we could drop from a 6800 to a, let's see what the 6700 XT costs right now. And the main reason I'm bringing this up, 6700 XT version, is that the 6700 XT is still a little bit better than a PlayStation 5 GPU. There's really no direct PC version, because the GPU in the PlayStation 5 is more like a 6700 non-XT, but it's also an APU with unified memory, and the PS5, there can be different optimizations for that kind of a setup. So there's no direct option, but the 6700 XT from a specs perspective is a bit ahead of what's in a PS5. Again, optimization between console and PC versions of games won't always mean you'll get better performance, but this does mean we are now, if I drop down to that, we're now down to $746. If I drop down to 6700 XT. So overall, we are now down to, what was it? We are down to $744. Let's just call it $745. And again, there's other GPUs in this price range you could take a look at. We're down to 27% of the price of our 4090 build, which is nice. If we look at our 6700 XT, we're at about 36% of the performance of the 4090. But I think in general at this point, it's more like your other thoughts might be just buy a PlayStation 5 or something like that. So that's might actually be where we'll kind of stop here, because at this point, if you pare it down lower than this, you can look at my my $500 PC build video I did recently. We're also getting really long on time here. And if you cut down to the same price as a PlayStation 5, you're no longer going to be as powerful as a PlayStation 5, unless you go used. And again, remember, on all of this, you can stretch your budget with today's sponsor, Jawa.gg, following the link in the pinned comment and video description.
The truth is, I am not happy with the current state of Linus Tech Tips. To be clear, my team's amazing, and we've basically perfected our gateway drug formula. It's that taste of hardcore tech that goes down smooth and has been turning young gamers into comp sci majors by the thousands for over a decade. The good news is that all changes today. I'm about to show you my plan to radically change the face of Linus Tech Tips, but it's going to take time and it's going to be extremely expensive. Welcome to LTT Lab 1. This has been a dream of mine for a long time, but due to a number of factors, including the white-hot real estate market here in Vancouver, I have found myself waiting and waiting for the right time, when what I should have done was just pull the trigger ages ago, regardless of the cost. We're hiring a couple of writers this time around, including one from MAC Address. You can apply down below. But that's not what this is. The vision for this lab is pretty simple. In the time I've been doing this job, tech journalism has suffered blow after blow after blow. Nearly every publication that I followed
Time takes another cut. Resist the urge to perfectly create the curse you live to see. Swallow the poison, ejected seed. You're not the one I wish to be. Tell your friends that I'm gone. They won't even care. They won't even stop to find me. Tell your friends that I'm dead. They won't even care. They won't even stop to warn me. Tell your friends that I'm gone. They won't even care. They won't even stop to find me. Tell your friends that I'm dead. They won't even care. They won't even stop to warn me. A woman cries alone, her child just the same. My never-rotting stone, she will get hurt again. Resist the urge to perfectly create the curse you live to see. Swallow the poison, ejected seed. You're not the one I wish to be. Tell your friends that I'm gone. They won't even care. They won't even stop to find me. Tell your friends that I'm dead. They won't even care. They won't even stop to warn me. Tell your friends that I'm gone. They won't even care. They won't even stop to find me. Tell your friends that I'm dead. They won't even care. They won't even stop to warn me. Tell your friends that I'm gone. They won't even care. They won't even stop to find me. Tell your friends that I'm dead. They won't even care. They won't even stop to warn me. Tell your friends that I'm gone. They won't even care. They won't even stop to find me. Tell your friends that I'm dead. They won't even care. They won't even stop to warn me. Tell your friends that I'm gone. They won't even care.
This is a story about moments. One might say we add meaning to the time we perceive by calling it a moment. So by calling it a moment, time becomes a vessel for experience. How we refer back to and explain the experience we had during a specific time determines the emotional connotation we attach to that moment, and where it belongs in a string of moments we call our memories. These in turn define how we explain ourselves and the world around us, and are the root to our personal sense of reality. A story, on the other hand, is the description, either true or imagined, of a connected series of events, or moments if you will. Therefore, an argument could be made that stories and reality have the same origin, simply because they can only exist through the explanation of moments. 4 years ago, during one of those moments, a graphic designer and a music producer were about to go on tour for the first time when they decided to create their first bigger body of work. Welcome to A Moment in Time. We go back to when we were young. The year is 1996, and it's the 31st of December. It's 11:50 p.m., and Mom just woke you up to watch the fireworks together. As you walk through the upstairs hallway, you see faint flashes of colored light seeping in through the windows. You look outside to see fireworks in the distance made by people who started celebrating early. Your sleepiness makes way for excitement. 1997 is going to be awesome. You're going to school for the first time, and you're turning 5. You go downstairs and enter the living room. The TV is on while Dad pours champagne. You get a glass of apple juice with sparkling water, and you almost feel like you're one of the grown-ups. Suddenly, a big 10 appears on the television screen, and everyone starts counting down. You're a lot older now, 17 to be exact. It's a hot summer day and the sun is about to set. You think about all the things that happened in the last 2 weeks while you admire the evening sky. How can you ever forget that one sunrise you both witnessed? Did we really kiss? Slightly in disbelief, your reminiscent dream continues when you hear the announcer calling your train. It's about to depart from a different platform, so you have to run. Got too distracted, I guess. You quickly say goodbye to all your new friends, but the most important one is nowhere to be seen. A bit disappointed because of this, and because you never got any contact information, you still start running to the other platform to get on a train back home. Out of breath and exhausted, you take a seat in your cabin. You made it. But you don't really care because you are beating yourself up. Why didn't I ask how to stay in touch? But when the train starts moving, it hits you. Maybe it's better that we don't know how to contact each other, because that way this beautiful memory stays preserved. Maybe the versions of us outside of summer camp are not even compatible. And do I really want to find out? While the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the horizon, your mind starts wandering off. Your self-depreciative frown slowly turns into a grateful smile as you recall all these treasures you've gained. Last year was intense. You worked so hard to get here that you almost forgot what it feels like to live without stress. But today is different. Only one more exam and it's summer break. However, you're still highly focused because you can't afford to fail this class. There is still a little bit of time left when you write down the last answers for the test, so you decide to read through all of them again and check if you made any mistakes. Everything seems to be in order, so you hand it in. Still a little time left. You sit back down and can't help but think about the answers you just wrote down. Really have to pass this one. Did I skip any steps in explaining my answers? Doubt and anxiety are looming in the back of your mind while you exit the classroom. The outside weather is beautiful, however, and you start walking the usual route home. You pass the park close to your house and notice some kids playing. They don't seem to have a care in the world. And that's when you were overwhelmed by a sudden feeling of relief. You did everything you could have done. Summer break just started, and the sun is out. So with every step you take, you leave a little care behind. It's 4 p.m., just 2 more hours before you can go home. Your eyes are fixated on the clock like you're watching a show on Netflix, but it doesn't really seem to help pass the time quicker. You reluctantly do some more work, but it's hard to stay focused. The only reason you have this job is to pay the bills, and you would quit in an instant if there was something better. But for now, it has to do. As the minutes go by, you feel the freedom getting closer and closer. 6 p.m. Salvation is here. You pack up your stuff faster than your co-workers can say, "See you tomorrow," and you get out of there. While sitting on a train, you realize how tired you are. But it really doesn't matter, because you're going home. And that's the only place you want to be right now. The hallway is empty. You're eating a sandwich while sitting on a large pelican case. The taste doesn't really register though, because your mind is still trying to process what happened an hour ago. It's way more quiet down here than it was up in the air just now. You can still hear the engines of the plane roaring. The adrenaline-induced anticipation leading up to the jump was nothing compared to those few seconds of freefall. It was like nothing else you've ever experienced before. When the parachute deployed, the only thing that was breaking the silence was the sound of you yelling in excitement. But from the moment you landed until now, you haven't said a word other than mumbling that you're okay and that you need a second to process. So here we are, last bite of the sandwich. Still a bit dazed by it all. Life seems to have slowed down a lot. But you're proud. You finally showed yourself that you're less scared than you thought you were. So while you walk back to your friends, you realize that from now on, nothing will feel the same. Many years have passed, but it just isn't the same anymore. You and your partner have been talking about a divorce for a while now, but because of your 4-year-old, the conversation is quite complex. It's New Year's Eve, and you're both on the couch watching stand-up on television. Although it's hilarious, the room stays silent. Neither of you is really paying attention to what Eddie Murphy is saying. Instead, you both silently recall the chain of events that led up to this moment. It's been 15 years together, of which 7 years married. You are part of each other's history. So even if the last 2 years didn't produce good memories, the years prior to that definitely make up for it. During those years, you evolved and grew together, and as a result, you created something that you both love more than anything. Thank you. You're surprised of what comes out of your mouth. You look at each other, and for a moment, a vaguely familiar remnant of your love is tangible in the room before it slips away again. You look at your watch. 11:45. Your heart fills up with melancholy when you realize that this is probably going to be the last time that the three of you go watch the fireworks together. But that thought makes this moment only more beautiful. So a slightly confused but happy tear escapes the corner of your eye as you walk up the stairs to wake her up. As humans, we have an interesting relationship with the concept of choice. On one end, we idolize the idea of free will and proudly refer to it in culture as the defining aspect of being human. But on the other hand, it seems as if choices frighten us because they inherently imply change to occur. And because we are pretty good at creating and protecting our comfort zones, change often seems to be an unwelcome guest. Apart from that, it seems like choosing for something doesn't always correspond with the desired outcome. Some might argue that this is partly because of the growing complexity of our society. We have to go through many hoops and get permission from a lot of people and systems in order to bring our choices to fruition. Therefore, it leaves a lot up to chance, which is a pretty counterintuitive parameter in relation to choice. But one thing is certain, we will encounter a lot of crossroads on our path. But the tricky part is that they are often disguised as just a straight road until you reach a T-junction. Somewhere, already far away from their comfort zones, two guys reached a long stretch of seemingly straight road. And while they were looking for the hidden crossroads, they created their second bigger body of work. Welcome to the choices we face. The time has come. School wants you to specialize in a subject, and therefore you have to make up your mind and know what you want to be. You enroll in a bunch of orientation classes, and some of them are actually pretty fun, but none of them click. None of them give you the feeling like, yeah, this is what I'm meant to be doing. As the school year progresses, the pivotal moment of you making a final decision gets closer, and something that should feel inspiring feels like a burden raising your stress levels. Why can't it be as easy as when you were young? That time when you just knew what you wanted to be when you grew up. But this was all before you got exposed to the supposed rules of being a grown-up. Some of them necessary, others not so much. All woven together into a fiber we call society. The question is though, how far can these rules bend to your will, and how can you achieve those seemingly impossible dreams? You know it won't be by just concerning yourself with the choices that school provides you with, because that would mean making concessions when it comes to your life path. Instead, you try to remember what it felt like to know what you want to be, like you knew when you were young. You sat in front of the TV and saw someone doing something on there that sparked a dream, for instance. And although the dream itself doesn't really apply or matter to you anymore, you still know what it feels like to have one. So while you compare all your interests to each other and measure the feeling they give you, you feel grateful for the kid you once were. Because that kid taught you how to dream, which you will never forget. Finally, you can leave that sleepy town you grew up in and have your own place close to the city. It feels like a well-deserved fresh start. No more ridiculous rules from your parents, no more annoying popular kids at school, no more feeling misunderstood. Because you can create your own rules and social environment now. But this doesn't necessarily mean that things will automatically go your way from here on out. You have a lot of experience in what you don't want your environment to be like, but not so much in what you do prefer. Therefore, the potential of this clean slate feels a bit overwhelming, because if you don't act on it, time will choose for you, and you know all too well what that feels like. So in order to make new friends, you realize that a lot is dependent on how you carry yourself and what persona you choose to show to the outside world. So, you start putting yourself out there. You introduce yourself to your new neighbors, have some drinks with coworkers, and look for initiatives from people with similar interests. You try to find common ground primarily in your strengths instead of your weaknesses, because you are done playing the victim in your story, and you want friends you can grow with. But at the same time, you just don't want to be alone. Laying it out like this doesn't really help you getting rid of that overwhelming feeling. It seems like a lot of work. But one thing is very clear to you. Authenticity is the name of the game. Because if you are okay with just being yourself around others, they are inclined to do the same. And if some of them don't, or don't seem to appreciate that from you, you will just move on and leave them be. Some people say you are who you surround yourself with, but you know that that is a two-way street. Are you really doing this? For a moment, your cursor hovers over the confirmation button. You and your friends impulsively decided to do this only 2 days ago. And even though you've been fantasizing about it for years, you've just been too scared to actually do it on your own before. Screw it. You click the button and get an email confirmation only 2 seconds later. It feels unreal. You just booked a flight to Tokyo. Excited, you call one of your friends to tell the big news. And the anticipation only amplifies when you list all the things you want to do out there. You have to start packing your suitcase soon, however, because this weekend is coming up fast. Holy moly, this weekend already. Isn't that too fast and impulsive, actually? Nah. You pull yourself together with the realization that those thoughts are mostly emanating from irrational and easily debunkable fears. And although you don't even know what's going to happen, the chances are very slim that this trip will turn into a full-blown nightmare. So, reassured, you carry on with your preparations. And packing your bag has never been this fun before. You've had it. It's like your parents don't want you to be happy.